What really happens when a republic becomes too powerful for its own political system? What happens when one man becomes too beloved, too ambitious, and too successful for the old rules to restrain him? And what happens when his former ally, once a friend, mentor, and political partner, becomes his greatest rival? The story of Caesar versus Pompey is not just about two generals fighting for control of Rome. It is the story of the Roman Republic collapsing under the weight of its own glory. It is the story of ambition, jealousy, loyalty, betrayal, and a civil war that reshaped the future of Western civilization. And in this video, I am going to break down everything how this conflict began, why the two most powerful men in Rome turned against each other, how the war unfolded, what its final outcome was, and how this single conflict marked the end of the Roman Republic forever. So without any delay, let's start. To understand this war, we must go back to a time when Caesar and Pompey were not enemies at all, but allies. In fact, they began as political partners in what historians call the First Triumvirate, an informal alliance between three men: Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Crassus, the wealthy Roman financier. Each man brought something crucial. Pompey brought military prestige. He had defeated pirates, expanded Roman power in the east, and was celebrated as Rome's greatest general. Crassus brought money, the kind of money needed to buy influence, loyalty, and political leverage. Caesar brought ambition, charm, political genius, and a deep connection with the common people. Together, they were unstoppable. Caesar became consul with their support, and afterward, he secured a long-term command in Gaul. This was where everything changed. Caesar didn't just govern Gaul, he conquered it. 8 years of continuous military brilliance turned him into the most popular man in Rome. His soldiers adored him. The public loved him. His victories brought enormous wealth, prestige, and influence. And this popularity terrified the Roman Senate. Pompey, who once enjoyed the title of Rome's greatest commander, now found himself overshadowed by Caesar's growing fame. At the same time, Crassus died in the disastrous campaign against the Parthians, leaving the triumvirate broken. With Crassus gone, Pompey and Caesar faced each other directly, with no mediator in between. Their alliance, once held together by political convenience and even family ties, Pompey had married Caesar's daughter Julia, began to collapse. When Julia died in childbirth, the personal bond between the two men dissolved, and political tension filled the gap. Rome, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly unstable. Gangs roamed the streets. Elections turned violent. Senators worried that Caesar's popularity with the masses might allow him to seize power. Pompey, seeking stability and perhaps fearing the rise of Caesar, aligned himself with the Senate's conservative faction. The Senate, eager to use Pompey against the dangerous Caesar, granted Pompey extraordinary powers. Gradually, Pompey became the defender of the old republic, while Caesar appeared to many as a rising threat. The final break came when Caesar's term as governor in Gaul was ending. Roman law required him to return to Rome as a private citizen before running for consul again. But if he did that, his enemies would immediately prosecute him on trumped-up charges if necessary to destroy him politically. Caesar requested permission to run for office while remaining in command, something that had been allowed in special cases before. But the Senate refused. They demanded he dismiss his army at once. Caesar knew exactly what that meant. If he returned without his legions, he would be powerless. Pompey, backed by the Senate, could arrest him, exile him, or even kill him with complete legality. So Caesar made the most important decision of his life. He marched south, reached the small river separating his province from Italy, the Rubicon, and there he paused. The moment was so significant that ancient writers described it as a moment of destiny. Caesar looked at the river, understood that crossing it with an army meant declaring war on the Roman state, and then he spoke the famous words, "The die is cast." He crossed. What followed was shock and panic in Rome. Pompey, believing he could not defend the city against Caesar's experienced legions, evacuated Rome with the Senate and retreated to the south. He believed he needed time to gather forces from Spain, Greece, and the eastern provinces where he had many loyal allies. Caesar entered Rome peacefully and seized the state treasury. He needed resources, supplies, and authority, and he took them with remarkable speed. But Caesar knew Pompey would not give up easily. Pompey was still the general who had defeated Mithridates, captured Syria, and broken the pirates. He had the support of Rome's aristocracy, the backing of many wealthy provinces, and the legitimacy of the Senate. Caesar had momentum, but Pompey had resources. The first major phase of the war unfolded in Spain. Caesar knew that Pompey's strongest legions were stationed there. If he left them behind, they could attack him from the west. So instead of chasing Pompey into Greece immediately, Caesar moved with lightning speed into Spain. There, he confronted Pompey's commanders and forced their surrender without a major battle. "I have conquered Pompey's army," he reportedly said, "without Pompey." But Pompey himself was gathering strength in the east. When Caesar finally sailed to Greece, he faced a far larger army, Pompey's legions, reinforced by eastern allies, senators, nobles, and experienced officers. Caesar's forces, although loyal and skilled, were outnumbered. The two armies maneuvered for months. Caesar even faced a severe crisis when Pompey cut off his supply lines. Hunger spread through Caesar's camp. Morale dropped. But Caesar, always the master of improvisation, pulled off daring maneuvers to escape and regroup. Finally came the decisive moment at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, a wide, open plain in central Greece. Pompey had nearly twice as many soldiers. The senators in his camp urged him to crush Caesar once and for all. Pompey had a strong position. He believed that Caesar's tired, hungry troops could be defeated with a massive cavalry charge. Caesar understood Pompey's strategy perfectly. He arranged his troops in an unconventional formation, hiding a fourth line of infantry behind his cavalry to ambush Pompey's horsemen. When the battle began, Pompey's cavalry charged as expected, pushing back Caesar's smaller cavalry, but then Caesar gave the signal. His hidden fourth line surged forward with spears angled upward. Pompey's cavalry panicked, retreated, and chaos rippled through his entire army. Caesar's legions advanced with deadly discipline. Pompey's forces broke, and the battle was lost. Pompey fled, and this is the moment where everything took a darker turn. When Pompey withdrew to Greece, he thought he was buying time. He thought Caesar lacked resources, ships, and supplies to follow him. But Caesar did what he always did. He took risks no one else dared. He crossed the Adriatic with a tiny fleet in winter, slipping past Pompey's navy as if fate itself was clearing a path for him. But once he reached Greece, Caesar found himself outnumbered, cut off, and trapped between Pompey's superior forces and the sea. For the first time in this war, he was not the one in control. Yet even then, he refused to retreat. Instead, he began maneuvering, drawing Pompey into smaller engagements, cutting off foraging parties, and forcing the larger army to stretch its supplies thin. Pompey, surprisingly, played defensively. He built fortified camps, blocked Caesar's access to food, and tried to starve him into surrender. Many critics of Pompey later said this was his greatest mistake, that he should have unleashed his huge army and crushed Caesar early. But Pompey remembered Caesar at Elisa, at the Rhine, in Britain. He knew Caesar's men fought like demons when cornered, so he waited. But Caesar refused to die slowly. He slipped away and established a new position at Dyrrachium, hoping to break Pompey's hold. Here, Caesar pushed his soldiers to build massive defensive lines, almost like a siege of an army rather than a city. Pompey built counter-fortifications. It became a bizarre mirror match, each general waiting for the other to make the wrong move. Finally, Pompey struck. He launched a major attack on Caesar's fortified lines and broke through them. For the first time in the entire civil war, Caesar was decisively defeated. His army nearly collapsed. Many commanders would have fallen back to Italy or sought a negotiated surrender. But Caesar gathered his men, looked them in the eyes, and told them the truth. This was not Pompey's victory, it was your panic. Instead of breaking morale, it strengthened it. Caesar marched away, reorganized, and sought a battlefield more favorable to his style of attack. That battlefield would be Pharsalus. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Pompey held every advantage. He had nearly double Caesar's infantry, far more cavalry, and the support of most of the Senate's finest families. Many believed the battle was already won before it began. Pompey positioned his cavalry on his left flank under Labienus, Caesar's former lieutenant who had defected its symbolic dagger in Caesar's heart. The plan was simple. Pompey's cavalry would overwhelm Caesar's horsemen, swing around and smash Caesar's rear. With Caesar surrounded, victory would be total. But Caesar anticipated this. He quietly hid a fourth line of reserves behind his understrength cavalry, a line of experienced soldiers instructed not to attack with javelins, but to thrust directly at the faces of the opposing horsemen. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. When Pompey's cavalry charged, they expected an easy victory. Instead, they met a silent wall of hardened legionaries driving spears toward their eyes. The cavalry panicked, broke, and scattered. Caesar immediately ordered a full advance. His entire line pushed forward with ruthless discipline while Pompey watched the collapse unfold. Caesar's men stormed Pompey's camp soon after. The unbeatable general of Rome fled the battlefield on horseback, his decades-long prestige evaporating in a single afternoon. Pompey escaped to Egypt, hoping that the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII would support him. But the political reality of the ancient world was ruthless. The Egyptian court believed Caesar would win the civil war, so Ptolemy's advisors murdered Pompey the moment he stepped ashore, hoping to present Caesar with a gift of loyalty. When Caesar arrived and was handed Pompey's severed head, he was horrified. Pompey had been his rival, his enemy, but also his former ally, his son-in-law, and one of Rome's greatest leaders. Caesar wept. Years of conflict, ambition, and political tension had reduced Pompey, once the most powerful man in the world, to a pitiful corpse on a foreign beach. But the war did not end there. Caesar became entangled in an internal Egyptian civil war between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII. Supporting Cleopatra, he won the Alexandrian War and reinstated her as queen. Only then did he return to Rome's remaining hotspots of resistance. He defeated Pompey's remaining supporters in Africa at Thapsus, where Cato the Younger, symbol of republican virtue, chose suicide over living under Caesar. Then in Spain at Munda, Caesar faced the final remnants of Pompey's legacy, his sons and loyalists, who refused to surrender. Caesar won, but it was the bloodiest battle his veterans ever fought. When it was over, the Roman world finally belonged to him. But here comes the tragic core of the story. Caesar had won the war, but in doing so, he ended the political system that had shaped Rome for centuries. The Roman Republic was built on checks, balances, traditions, and power shared among elites. Civil war shattered that. Caesar became the unrivaled ruler. The Senate called him dictator for life. For some, he was a savior, the man who ended chaos and restored order. For others, he was a tyrant destroying the last fragments of the Republic. And just as the Republic fell because of political ego, ambition, and fear, Caesar's fate would be sealed by those same forces. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, senators surrounded him in the theater of Pompey, ironically, at a statue of the very man whose defeat had brought Caesar to power. They stabbed him 23 times, believing they were restoring the Republic. Instead, their act triggered another civil war, one even bloodier, and ultimately birthed the Roman Empire under Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. When we look back, the civil war between Caesar and Pompey wasn't just a clash between two powerful men. It was a warning, a demonstration of what happens when political systems collapse under ambition. Pompey represented the old republic, trying desperately to preserve tradition. Caesar represented change, momentum, and the rise of personal power. Their rivalry didn't just end the Republic. It reshaped the entire Mediterranean world, paving the way for emperors, expansion, and centuries of Roman dominance. And with that, we reached the end of this dramatic journey through one of history's most transformative civil wars. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think Caesar was justified in marching on Rome? Or was Pompey right to defend the Republic? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know how you see this turning point in history.